Hey, what's up guys? My name is Nicholas Corcel and you're watching The Literary Nomad. Today we're going to be talking about The Brief, Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Díaz, a Dominican-American writer who has had a very interesting career, to say the least. At one point being widely considered one of the most promising and hottest writers alive, to becoming almost a social pariah who hasn't really written or published much in the last decade. Today we're going to be focusing on his first ever novel, like I said, Oscar Wilde, and tracing it as one of the most interesting, if not the best novel written this century. On a plot level, this book is fairly simplistic, right? It follows a Dominican-American boy named Oscar de Leon, who later becomes kind of nicknamed or bullied into accepting the name of Oscar Wilde. And this boy is very atypically Dominican in a stereotypical sense, right? You know, we have these ideas that Dominicans are very athletic, they're very good with women, they don't have trouble picking up women or having relationships, cheating, things like that, right? These are all topics that Junot Díaz has talked about extensively throughout his work, and this is no different. But Oscar is kind of the perfect foil in many ways to a typical in quotes Dominican man, and perhaps rather the typical stereotypical. But yeah, Oscar really defies all of these notions, right? He's a super nerdy, obsessed with writing, movies. He loves Akira. He likes pop culture, lots of 70s and 80s pop culture stuff. So a lot of references in this book. Really every other page probably has 3 or 4 references to pop culture. And it's in that way that this book feels almost like a YA novel, which is super interesting because, you know, I don't really read a lot of YA. I did a lot when I was in high school, but anymore I don't really read a lot of YA novels. But this book almost can function as 2 different books. On one level we have the YA novel that you can just read in a very straightforward sense, and you can have a fun, enjoyable story about a young Dominican-American boy who doesn't get girls, who struggles to navigate through life, who's scared of being a virgin, who is really guided by this raison d'etre of having sex with a woman for the first time. You could read it like that, and that's a perfectly valid reasoning and a perfectly valid reading, and you would enjoy it and you'd get a lot out of it, but you would move on, right? The book wouldn't permeate for years in your mind. Or you can have an alternative approach and read it more as a work of literary fiction that is a comprehensive deconstruction on the history of the Dominican Republic, what it means to be a Dominican, what it means to be an immigrant, what it means to be like a third cultured kid, all of these types of things, as well as a deconstruction on linguistic histories, heritage, languages, stereotyping, racism, all of these types of things. And that's the reading that I think is a little bit more interesting. What's cool about this book though, especially in regards to that YA reading that I talked about, is that you can really use this novel as a vehicle to get people who maybe aren't into literary fiction reading things that are more thoughtful and more deliberate, and allowing them to make the book as literary or academic as they want. I feel like you could give this book to a 9th grader, to a 10th grader, and they would enjoy it, even if they didn't do the extra work to get something out of it. You know, where some works, to appreciate and to enjoy, you have to do the legwork. This one's not like that, right? 2666, for example, is a book that you have to do the legwork to enjoy and to appreciate, in my opinion. This book, you can enjoy it on a superficial level, or you can go super, super deep with the text. And for that, it really does stand out. I honestly can't think of another book that is like that. And because of that, yeah, I would really strongly advise this book to be pushed on to younger people. I think that it is an excellent introduction to literary fiction, but also I don't believe that it's entirely accurate to describe it only as an introduction to literary fiction. I think it can also stand on its own, and while I don't think I agree that it's the best novel written this century, I don't find that claim to be incredulous. I think that you could make a reasonable argument about that. I wouldn't, but I also kind of resist saying things like something is the best or the worst novel especially of a 24-25 year long period. That's impossible, right? Could this be the best novel for some people? Absolutely. I don't find that to be even remotely hard to believe. So I do think that this book really has earned its reputation. It's one of the greatest works of literary fiction of the last 30 years. And for me, the thing that makes it so unique and stand out is not what it does on a plot level, right? Tracing a family through multiple generations, unpacking a brutal fascist dictatorship, a dictatorship that at times was backed by the United States. Doing all of that, while valuable, is not atypical, right? It's not an atypical thing to do to trace a multi-generational family story. We have many books like that, right? We have 100 Years of Solitude, things like that. So while valuable, again, not super atypical. Also, talking politically, that's even less uncommon. We have thousands of amazing books that track history in that way. What makes this book stand out to me is that it is not a novel that feels like it was written for like suburban America or for the Dominican Republic. It feels like it was a novel that was written specifically for first generation Dominican children. Maybe we could broaden the scope and say first generation Latino immigrants, people who feel like they're between the two cultures, really. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. This novel is unique in the sense that it's not written 100% in English, and it's not written 100% in Spanish. It'd be interesting to actually read what this looks like in the translated copy of Spanish, because I feel like in a way this would not translate well into Spanish, even though a lot of the book is in Spanish. And I say that because Diaz floats between English and Spanish, sometimes 4 or 5 times in a sentence. And he doesn't explain it. He doesn't explain the words. He doesn't, make a big show out of when he speaks Spanish. He doesn't tell us what it means. There are footnotes in the story, but the footnotes, interestingly enough, only really describe the historical things that we're talking about. They don't touch on the Spanish at all. There is no translations. There's no glossary at the end of it. You're expected to know, or you're expected to figure it out on your own. It doesn't hold your hand, and in that way, the book it feels like, I don't want to say authentic, but I guess it feels authentically, or at least authentic or true to its experience, or to the experience that it's trying to convey. And it doesn't feel like you are experiencing these things through a deeply suburban, or rather maybe not suburban, but an outsider's lens, right? Like, as you read the prose, it feels like you are reading an extension of the author himself. He's a Dominican American man who grew up in New York and New Jersey. This book feels like it was written, it feels like it was spoken by people with those life experiences. It's written in what can only be described as Spanglish, which is why before I talked about, how could this be translated into Spanish? Because those pieces where we go back and forth, would they have to flip it into English? I don't know. It would lose a lot of its, maybe not sentimentality, but meaning, originality, creativity, style. These type of things I think would all honestly really suffer in the translation. For those reasons, I really push back when I read things online like this is one of the best Latin American novels ever written, because can something be one of the best Latin American novels ever written if it loses a lot of its wonder when it's translated into Spanish? I don't think so, personally. I don't think that it can be. Does that degrade the quality of the novel? No. To the contrary, I would say that this novel almost creates its own category, in the sense that this book isn't Dominican and it's not American, right? It's a combination of the two, and we don't have a lot of pieces of literature that kind of operate at that intersection. We love like poles, right? We love being over here or over here. We don't like to live in that gray area in the middle very often, and this book does. This book embraces it. I haven't really talked much about the plot of it, but I think that's kind of a testament to the quality of the book and to the magic of the book, really. Like, what happens doesn't matter in the sense of, or in comparison to how it happens. And this is a book that if you are a writer, if you're a creative, many times you'll stop and possibly feel insecure and think, this is a book that I wish I had written. I wish that I had written this book in a way that is relevant to my life experiences, of course, but it borders on perfection in the execution, because a story of a morbidly obese Dominican kid who is a perfect, almost like tropey foil to the stereotypes of the Dominican Republic doesn't sound like something that would be that great, right? Like, it sounds okay. It sounds like an okay YA novel might, reach a couple kids who don't nicely fall in to stereotypes, and that has value, I suppose, but not something that you would think would top like the New York Times list of the best novels of this century, not at all. Yet this book does, and I think that that's a testament to the quality of the prose and just the sheer force of the prose, and even like with the layering of the metaphors, right? We have the whole book is extended metaphors, and so we have the historical stuff that's happening, talking about the fascist dictatorship of Trujillo and the Dominican Republic, but we also have a lot of pop culture references that are going on here, and it's in these pop culture references that are kind of left unexplained. We have all kinds of footnotes, and I gotta be honest, I'm not a huge fan of footnotes, but I do like them in this book. I think that they work. Historical things get explained, but pop culture references do not. They're left intentionally vague, and you, the reader, have to do the legwork to look them up yourself, to research, to read the text and watch the films that are referred to. And it's in this way that our relationship to Oscar is that of the people around him. Everybody in the book interacts with Oscar in a way that is like at a distance. Even the people that like him, they don't understand him. And if you don't do the legwork, which I'll admit I did not, you don't do the legwork to embrace this nerd culture, the pop culture, these things, you will always have a distant relationship with Oscar. You can't speak his language. You don't understand what he's saying. You might understand the Spanglish, but you don't understand his personal language. You don't understand the references. You don't understand the images and the things that matter specifically to him. And in all honesty, I've barely touched on the plot of this book at all, and I know that I've talked about the plot doesn't matter too much, and that it's the style, and I do agree with that. I'm not going to get too deep into the plot, but I will say this much, that the plot of this book is good, right? It's captivating, it keeps you interested, you become invested. One character's journey that I think is really, really interesting to track is their mother, the mother of Oscar and his sister. She is a character that you're going to hate and you're going to love, but she really helps you understand, some of the negativeness, or some of the things that people complain about having immigrant parents, things that I've heard my whole life with friends with immigrant parents. You can't relate to their life experiences if you grow up in the U.S., right? If you grow up in New York City or New Jersey, wherever, you can't relate to somebody who grew up in Trujillo, Santo Domingo. You just can't. It's impossible. You never will. You can try to empathize, but that's as far as it's going to go. And that disconnect in life experiences is so crucial, Like, I was recently reading a short story by Julia Alvarez called Daughter of Invention, and I don't think that it was doing it at a level that was as complex as this, but also it was much shorter. It was a 6-7 page short story rather than a 300-page novel. But she talks a lot about being like kind of in between cultures, not like having that friction between parent and daughter, and that happens a lot in this book, and I think that is something that's really interesting to track, and it makes you kind of change or adjust the way that you interface with the world around you in your own day-to-day life. Like for me, I walked away from this book thinking, we need to give those people more grace, we need to give them more understanding, more compassion, these types of things, because their life experiences were different, and by expecting people to adapt and submit in many ways to your own life experiences, is you erasing theirs, as you saying that their experiences was invalid because it wasn't American. And I think on a level, that is a deeply racist, xenophobic idea. Do I think that the people in this book were deeply racist and xenophobic? I mean, yes, but not in that way, or not because of that. So that is something that I think that was like an actionable takeaway. And sometimes it's hard to find like actionable takeaways from books like this, like from literary fiction. Sometimes it's like kind of plants philosophical seeds in your brain. There's very rarely like something that you can physically grab and apply to your life. This book provided me with that, which I think was fantastic and a further testament to its strength. Now, unfortunately, there is one other massive elephant in the room that you have to talk about when you're talking about Oscar Wilde, or really when you're talking about Junot Díaz at all. And that is, of course, the sexual assault allegations that were placed upon him, and the allegations that have kind of derailed, if not condemned, his literary career. Many women, or at least several women, have come out and come forward and alleged things ranging from unwanted advances, comments, these types of things against Diaz, to the point to where the school that he teaches at, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, had felt the need to complete a thorough investigation over his actions. And that has really kind of derailed his career. He went from this superstar who won the Pulitzer Prize and was writing best-selling novels, was kind of like a rock star of the literary world, to a relative nobody, in a sense. And I think that's something that you have to grapple with and you have to think about when you read his work. I think if you choose to not read it because of that, it's hard to argue with that reasoning. But I also think it's important that we think that we make note that he was investigated and that he was found to have done no wrongdoing, at least at MIT. He still has that job. Some of the claims brought against him were verifiably proven to be false. Now, does that mean that all of them were false? No, it doesn't. They all haven't been thoroughly investigated, at least not to my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But a significant amount of these allegations have been verified, quote unquote, to not be accurate. And so that really begs the question of, okay, what do we do and how do we approach these situations? If an allegation is proven to be false, how do we try to apply these notions of, like restorative justice to the person that was accused, right? How do we do that while still allowing people to come forward and to have that platform to where they feel like they are heard and valued and that they're wanted to speak out and to condemn these people when they need to be rightfully condemned? Conversely, if the person didn't do it, how do we proceed? How we have proceeded with Diaz, I personally don't agree with, right? Because his career has significantly been curtailed by these allegations, and I think you could make a strong argument that his career will never be the same because of that, because of allegations that were proven to be false or shown to be false by his employer. Now, another valid argument that you might make is that MIT as an institution is inherently biased. And they're incentivized to keep him in a job because he's, by far their most famous writer, probably the most famous writer that has ever worked there. So yes, they are incentivized to keep him. But if we are making the argument that MIT is biased and their investigation is invalid and they're employing him despite that, which I agree, I don't agree, but I can see how you would make that argument, then we have to question the prestige and the cultural capital that we assign to institutions such as MIT, right? We can't think those two things at once. We can't say that they would employ somebody that they believe did these things and they are one of the greatest institutions in the world. If this part is true, this part cannot be true, right? An institution cannot be this bastion of social and cultural capital and be willing to cover those things up, right? Those two ideas directly confront each other. Conversely, so if we're going to assign that prestige to MIT, then we also have to trust that they are credible, right? You can't give somebody a huge amount of credibility, but only when it suits the argument that you're trying to make. So either you have to believe that he did it, or you have to believe that he did it and MIT is not a credible institution, or you can believe that their investigation found nothing. Maybe another investigation might later on, or in a different case that they didn't look into. That could be possible, but you either have to think that their investigation was thorough and done in good faith. And investigations could be wrong still, right? But you have to believe that they did the best that they could and that they have that prestige is then valid, right? I think that you have to have both factors in contention with your mind. These are just the conclusions I have drawn. Not saying that they're the correct ones, but I do think as a country that we need to start thinking through, or not even as a country, as a world, as a global culture, we have to start thinking through these issues and think about what we do with these people that have been condemned, because if the more we progress through time, the more people will be the more allegations that will come out, and most are true. I believe most allegations are true, but of course as more come out, some will not be true. I mean, I think that's just obvious, right? That's the law of just averages and probability. So when these things happen or when these things are alleged that are then proven to have not happened, how do we provide or implement retroactive restorative justice for the person that was accused? That's something I think that is difficult. I don't think it's impossible, but I think that we have to figure out how to do it. Otherwise, we are doing gross disservices to Junot Díaz, and I think that we're silencing one of the most important voices in literature, one of the greatest writers that not only America but the world has to offer. And I think in 100 years we will look back on that with great shame, and I think that we're really robbing humanity of a lot of great work. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. My name is Nicholas Corcel, and I will see you next time.